Hudson Institute here in DC. We are a research organization promoting American leadership for a secure, free, and prosperous future. My name is Jeremy Hunt, and I'm a media fellow here. And today we'll be discussing the continued fight for religious freedom in China. And as many of you know, the Chinese Communist Party continues to persecute religious minorities and commit countless human rights abuses. And despite China's attempts to mask their atrocities, reports show evidence of forced mass sterilization, separating children from their families, and forced labor camps for those who dare to practice the religion of their choice. What are the implications of these atrocities for American national security strategy? Well, today we have Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Religious Freedom here at Hudson, our very own Nina Shea. So thank you so much for being here with us, Nina.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce you to everyone watching at home. Nina Shea is a senior fellow here at Hudson Institute, where she directs the Center for Religious Freedom, an entity that she founded. She has been a human rights lawyer for 40 years and has worked extensively for the advancement of religious freedom in U.S. foreign policy as it confronts Islamic extremism and authoritarian regimes around the world. And she advocates on behalf of those persecuted for religious reasons abroad. She helped launch and lead the coalition to adopt the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And from 1999 to 2012, she served as commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And she's been appointed 7 times by the U.S. House of Representatives. She was also appointed as a U.S. delegate to the United Nations main human rights body for both Republican and Democratic administrations. She authored or co-authored 3 books on religious persecution and genocide. Her co-authored book, Silenced, on the threat of freedoms posed by Islamic blasphemy and hate speech codes, was published by Oxford University Press. And for over a decade, beginning in 2006, she authored or edited 4 widely publicized reports on extremist doctrine and Saudi state educational materials, and even testified in Congress and met with political leaders until those texts were finally revised. And she also just frequently testifies at congressional hearings and briefings. Her research and analysis has formed the basis of a bill on persecution in Nigeria, which was reintroduced in Congress this year. And she continues to write on international religious freedom concerns in the Wall Street Journal, National Review, Foreign Affairs, First Things, and various other national outlets. And she organizes strategy working groups, conferences, briefings, and podcasts on this very issue. So we're just so honored to have her here with us. Nina Shea, she's briefed presidents, secretaries of states, and officials, and we're happy to have her here with us to talk about this important issue of religious persecution in China. Nina, I just wanted to first start off, if you could just give us kind of a general overview of how the CCP has been persecuting religious minorities today. What is an update? What's going on right now?
Well, I think it's important to get clear that China is persecuting all the minorities, the religious minorities, every single one of them. It has different rationales for doing it. You know, someone's seeking independence, or someone's, involved in terror, or someone's colluding with foreign. But even still, there is definitely an ideology that's hostile to religion. And it's not simply that religion is the opiate of the people that the Communist Party has adopted. It's because religion across the board believes in a higher authority, that believes in a different value system, a different morality. And it believes in individual dignity. The party cannot abide that. It cannot tolerate it. It allowed it to exist and even grow in the underground for a couple decades, always making life difficult for them across the board. But now there's a concerted crackdown, I think, to eradicate religion. And it's most obvious right now with the Uyghur Muslim community, which is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is waging a genocide, according to the United States government. Secretary Pompeo designated it as a genocide, and so did Secretary Blinken. So you have 2 administrations that agree that there is a genocide being waged against the Uyghur Muslim people. The Christians, there's a little bit more subtlety with this, but life is extremely difficult. There's oppression. We can get into that. There are 8 or 9 bishops that are Catholic bishops who are in detention, in secret detention today.
Wow.
And then the Tibetan Buddhists, it has very tight controls over a very tight blanket of surveillance in the Tibetan region, marking their every move. Falun Gong, it has waged, which is a homegrown spiritual movement that is an offshoot of Buddhism. So it's really an indigenous form of spirituality, and they have been, in my view, subject to a genocide as well, mostly through forced organ harvesting. So across the board, you see this horrific repression, and there's a couple characteristics to it. One is that the government tries to hide it. It's extremely secretive about it. It cordons off the entire area of Xinjiang where the Muslims are, the Uyghur Muslims, so no one can go in and verify what's going on. It doesn't give access to its prisons and detention camps. It is particularly intent on hiding what it's doing to the Christians, and how it's squeezing them, and how it's banned all children across the board from being exposed to religion, to entering a church or any other house of worship, and going to Bible school or catechism classes, learning about religion or praying. So it's banned children, and it's cracking down on this through surveillance cameras, through spies, so that in a generation, we may not see religion in China, I suspect, because if the next generation cannot be to learn about it, it becomes a criminal offense. It affects your life through various punishments. Then it's going to be repressed and possibly even die out.
Wow. Wow. And I kind of want to dive a little deeper into, you brought up first the Uyghur Muslims and also some of the Catholic bishops. I want to talk about both of those. But first on the Uyghurs, can you kind of walk us through how this kind of developed over time? Have they been, how many years has this been going on? They've been in these forced camps and the mass sterilization. Can you kind of give us a little history of specifically as it relates to the Uyghurs?
Yeah, so the Uyghur Muslims live in a particular region, Xinjiang, in a western remote area in China, along the border. And we started noticing through satellite photography that there was a construction of these massive buildings, and it became apparent that these were prisons, that these were detention camps, massive complexes. And then there were Uyghur Muslims who managed to get out or hear from loved ones, but word trickled out in 2017, 2018, that they were being rounded up by the hundreds of thousands. In fact, our military analysts looked at these structures and determined they could hold up to 3 million people. So there have been millions, at least 1 million is the commonly accepted figure, of Uyghur Muslims taken into detention camps. They're completely secret. They have no access to any independent observers. There is forced education. It's a brainwashing, indoctrination. Meanwhile, their mosques by the hundreds, by the thousands have been bulldozed and destroyed. They are singled out if they wear beards or if they fast on Ramadan, for example, the Muslim period of fasting. So any real display of religion is punished. They've also reported that they are being forcibly sterilized inside these camps. And that's something that we have to always keep in mind, that this is the modern face of repression. They do not go out in the streets with knives and behead people. They don't put them against the wall and shoot them for the public to see, but behind closed doors, they are taking the knives and using them to do medical procedures against prisoners' will. One is this forced sterilization, forced abortions against the Uyghurs, also forced organ harvesting to the Uyghurs now, as they did to the Falun Gong and continue to do to Falun Gong. So this is the modern face of repression, and they've perfected it on a massive scale. And this was corroborated, Jeremy, by population figures published by the government of China itself, so that you could see that the birth rate was plummeting in the Uyghur area, disproportionate with the rest of the country. So that it corroborated the fact that there were fewer children being born.
Wow!
Again, to eradicate this people, the next generation, not only to eradicate their faith, but to eradicate them. So that is the very definition of genocide.
Absolutely, and particularly on the forced organ harvesting, I know that there's new legislation now on the House floor addressing this very issue, and you've been at the forefront of advocating against a lot of this. So first, what can new legislation do to attack this problem, and what do you see as kind of the way forward, and how can the international community step up and demand answers here?
Well, the forced organ harvesting has been reported since the beginning of this century, for about 20 years, but the West did not want to hear about it. It was exactly when China was being ushered into the World Trade Organization, and we thought, that there would be a strategy that China would open up once it became economically more prosperous and a middle class developed. That has not happened, unfortunately. Coterminous with the coming into the market, the world market, they started practicing this forced organ harvesting, and that is taking prisoners, detainees, especially as we learned from the UN last year, 2 years ago, in their own findings, that religious minorities are being targeted for this in massive numbers, tens of thousands a year, to excise their vital organs, hearts, lungs, kidneys, and sell them, sell these organ parts in hospitals in China to patients. So the high-ranking members of the Chinese Communist Party also were the patients, are the patients, and so are foreign tourists. So this was again reported by 12 special experts on human rights at the UN. It's also been, they said they were alarmed by credible evidence that this is happening. There's also the International Society of Heart and Lung Transplantation made a very significant move last year to prevent their members from using or publicizing joint research with China on transplants because of this very reason. They said that the mathematical equation for their organ donor list grew by a perfect quadratic equation, so that it's a new organ donor system that started in 2015. Before that, they lied. After 2015, the Chinese Communist Party said, well, yes, we were using prisoner organs, which is a terrible ethical breach, because there is no freedom to give consent in those circumstances to donate your organs. But after 2015, they claim to have started a donor system, organ donor system, and we've seen over time in peer-reviewed journal article analysis that these grew by perfect quadratic equations across 4 organ groups. So it's not credible. And the whole world has seen recently, Jeremy, with first the COVID and then the balloon that went across, how China deceives, it lies, it is secretive, it seals off evidence so that you cannot confirm one way or the other. But through this very strong circumstantial evidence, we've determined that patients from the West have gone to China, have told their doctors that they are sick of waiting for the organ transplant in the United States, for example, or in Israel or some other place. They're going to go to China because they can get an appointment. Our lists are very long and the delays are very long before you can get an organ transplant. I think it's 4 years for a kidney in the United States is the wait time. And these desperately sick patients go to China. They can get an organ on demand, make an appointment. The next day they can get a heart-lung double transplant. And that's what happened in Israel to a patient, and he told his doctor, and that doctor is a member of the International Society of Transplantation. He drilled down and investigated, and that's how they came to adopt their ban last year. What can be done is to stop organ tourism, transplant tourism to China, which is what Congressman Chris Smith has. It's his bill that he introduced on against organ trafficking or organ transplant trafficking. And that's a big feature of it. And to report a reporting requirement for the president of the United States to identify who is involved in this in various countries, this horrific practice.
So yeah, we'll definitely hope that gets passed, and so that should be accountability on the issue. And
it would be the first law in the United States to even acknowledge that this is a problem and to try to do something about it. There a lot more needs to be done. For example, our hospitals, our medical institutions support their China's transplant sector in every way, through fellowships, through education, through financing, through joint research. So it's joint conferences. So this really has to stop. And our medical sector has been blind to this. That it's easy for them to say, well, we haven't seen it. That's because China won't let them see it. There isn't access. But if you study the evidence, it's just you cannot turn away.
Absolutely. And, we've seen this with all the different crackdowns on the Uyghurs. And you've also mentioned the underground church in China, Christians there that have been persecuted as well, even some Catholic bishops thrown into prison. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of what you've seen, what some of the recent reporting is showing us from there?
Yes, well, this is against all Christian churches, whether it's Protestant or Catholic. There are two main church branches that's non-denominational in China, so it's Catholic or Protestant, and it's happening to both. And some of the pastor of the early Reign Covenant Church is a Protestant leader. He's serving, I think, a 7 or 9 year sentence just for praying without authorization. His church has been around for a very long time, but President Xi in 2018 decided to crack down. There's a Protestant pastor who is American resident who's in prison, also serving an equally long sentence. Jonathan Cao is his name. And he was just delivering aid to Burma across the border, and that was the basis of his arrest. So we don't hear about these people, and we should. There are about 9 Catholic bishops that are in detention. They do not have any due process. They're not given trials. They're not giving sent a definite sentence, but they are isolated and holed up under house arrest. Sometimes they're subject to, or to, in one case, an empty seminary or some other place, a secret place that we don't even know where they are. Some have been held for decades. Some are held for months at a time or years at a time. One example, Bishop Jia, he was running a children's orphanage, and he was arrested a year or two ago and is under, a detention. They're subject to another bishop was accused of running a secret seminary, and he is in and out of detention for months at a time. And there's no due process, no sentence. It's opened timeline of how long he could be kept there. But I do have a list of all their names. And the only one that we have seen on trial was, of course, Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong. And he was fined, a relatively small fine, for an administrative breach in Hong Kong. But he is also under a national security law charge, and that's or a suspicion, and he's being investigated for that. It's been going on for almost a year. And so that limits everything he can do and say. And he's not under detention, but they have confiscated his passport, and he is not free to speak out. So there's varying degrees of punishment. There's the social credit system, the social credit score system, which is another extremely modern way of dealing with control and repression. And this is every citizen in China, every government organization, every business is to be ranked and evaluated for whether they're loyal to the party, whether they help the party, the Chinese Communist Party. And those who, for example, churches who do not screen out children or who allow in someone to attend their worship service that hasn't registered with the government, they are punished. They could be denied enrolling in higher education. They could be denied transportation. The government controls most of life there and most of the opportunities and services. So they have, digital money, can track them when they get on a bus, and the bus driver can kick them off as a result. So this is a very insidious way of controlling your behavior. The Catholic priests and everyone who's in detention, in the Christians and the Uyghurs, are subject to brainwashing, constant indoctrination and struggle sessions, in which you're humiliated and browbeaten and forced to renounce your beliefs and to sign a pledge of loyalty to the party.
Wow. And even with the recent protests, has that changed anything? Have you seen that move the needle at all? How has the CCP responded to some of the recent protests that have broken out in the last few months?
The protests were really very interesting because they did break out in 12 of the mega cities across China and in many university campuses all at the same time. And they were peaceful protests for the most part, but the government crushed them through surveillance and by police action. So they were stamped out. The government then relented on their main demand, which was to lift the zero COVID policy. The government did not let it go at that, though. They went around to whom they perceived to be the ringleaders or supporters. And one professor was put into a psychiatric hospital. She managed to get a phone call out to her students to tell them where she was before they took the phone away. Another was sent to an empty village, empty city that used to be President Xi's vision for the tech hub, the Silicon Valley of China, that didn't work out. That's an empty city, and two of the two men that they thought were supporting these protesters are there. We know that indefinitely held. That's their detention. They're alone, isolated. They can't contact their family. No one's there but them. And then there is a bridge band who is thought to be the intellectual inspiration for the protests. He put a banner across the bridge in Beijing saying no to zero COVID, and he's completely disappeared. So we don't know the full number. That we know there was a number of women in Beijing who were friends who went out to the protests, just lighting a candle or standing around, and silently holding up blank pieces of paper. It's called the White Paper movement. And they did that to protest censorship. We know that they made videos of them. Some of them made videos of themselves and said, if you're seeing this video, it's because I have disappeared. And they have been taken away. So, and its effect on the churches. Well, another church, a Catholic rectory and nuns convent was crushed just recently. Another bishop was put in detention or re-upped for more detention in January. So this is continuing. It's relentless.
Wow. And looking at the United States, and our response, first, I've heard that there are a lot of reports that China is now harassing even after some Chinese citizens are able to flee the country and come to the United States or other places in the West. They're still being harassed even after they make it to a free country. What is your understanding of those reports and kind of what is going on that end?
Yes, I've talked to 3 different groups. Falun Gong, Uyghurs, and Catholics, and they told me that they were followed, photographed, harassed in the United States. Now, this year and last year, that there is constant attempts to get in touch with them, probably for the purpose of coercing them to go back to their own country or to threaten them. And this has also happened. This is widely known. There's a wonderful report by Safeguard Defenders, a Spanish group, that has documented this. They've said tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been forced back into China in recent years for the purpose of punishment, because they're able to speak freely here about what's going on. And that's what the Chinese are worried about, Communist Party are worried about. They want to control the narrative worldwide. They're trying to compete with their system, their authoritarian system, against the West's liberal democracies. They want to show the world that theirs is better system, and that they would like other countries, particularly in the global South, to join them, to align themselves with them. And they want to sell them their surveillance equipment to do it. There's also Chinese police stations have been planted around the world, including in New York City. And the FBI is starting to investigate this. The FBI has also arrested several people, I think 7 Chinese nationals who were bullying and trying to harass other Chinese Americans, or Chinese in America, I should say, not American citizens, but those who have moved here, trying to harass them and bully them.
And how do we make the case for American citizens or people who are watching the story? How do we make the case that, look, this is in United States national security interest to call out just the atrocities that China is committing against its own people? How do we make the case and kind of make that connection to our own security interests and speaking up against what's going on?
Yeah, that's a very important point, because even people who are not religious or identify with one of these groups should be interested in following what's going on, because this really exposes the character of this regime, of the CCP. The practices, and if we had heeded this practice of deception and secrecy, we would have understood at the beginning of COVID that we could not take their word at face value, that it wasn't contagious, for example, human contagion. I think that it's extremely important that we understand that they're in a competition, not only economically and militarily, but culturally and governance-wise. And that this is the true picture, that looking at the treatment of these religious communities gives a fuller picture of what this Chinese Communist Party is about, what it intends to do, how it completely disregards individual freedom and individual dignity. And it believes in what's valuable to the party or not, as it said in with the social credit score system. So I think for those reasons, we have to pay attention. The religious communities are really the only remnant of civil society existing in China. The others that have been independent from the government, like trade unions or women's groups or human rights groups or journalist associations, they either don't exist or they're completely, self censoring and lying low right now during this terrible period of repression there. So the religious groups, at least some part of them, are that are underground or have not aligned with the Chinese Communist Party, are what's left of civil society, and they have an institutional support system and persist despite what is going on against them. They have the will to persevere.
Absolutely. And I look at even the international community, and the response, as you even mentioned, it has been quite muted on a lot of these fronts. Even yesterday, there was this tweet that the UN put out applauding China for this $800,000 donation to the Human Rights Fund, and applauding China and saying, others need to join China's lead here. I mean, it's just flabbergasting that they, just to even try to acknowledge anything China's done on human rights. That is, where they've done everything opposite to that. How do you feel about the UN's response to these and other international bodies, and kind of how they can continue to finally speak up about what's happening?
It is stunning how they have been co-opted by China, and how they're afraid of China, and how they want to please China. We saw that in the World Health Organization during COVID, and initially, looking at the transplant, the forced organ harvesting issue, the Chinese Communist Party proposed that there be a task force to control worldwide organ transplants. And the World Health Organization adopted their idea and appointed a member of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party as a member of this group. And I've talked to the researchers who did tremendous work to document not only testimony of family members and doctors who participated in it, but also the numbers of hospital beds and the organs, and trying to calculate all the circumstantial evidence. And they said that they tried to present this evidence to that task force, and they wouldn't give them the time of day. So no surprise there. So there is a manipulation by China, Chinese Communist Party, of the UN.
And just kind of as we look at the future, I mean, what do you see as a future for religious minorities in China? I mean, is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see any movement from the West to finally speak up? And what is your kind of view, your forecast on what we should expect in the coming years?
Well, I think that the Uyghurs have definitely come forward and started giving testimony, and it's been extremely valuable and heartrending testimony about what has happened to them and to their family members and to their civilization, the destruction of their unique ethnic culture. I think that the Christians have not done that so well. There's very little being said about how many house churches in the Protestant group have been shut down, and what is the fate of their pastors and congregations. We hardly hear anything about that, except when they're on trial and get sentenced. I mean, Samuel Lamb was one of the well-known figures. It was almost a Protestant pilgrimage when you went to China for a Christian to go to Samuel Lamb's church. And it was closed. It was recently closed. It had been tolerated for decades, even though it was never registered with the government. Samuel Lamb himself passed away a couple years ago, but his church in recent years was just closed by the government. The Vatican has been, just really very disappointing in covering up for what's going on, being part of this conspiracy of silence that the government insists on about what's happening to its own bishops. It finally, last fall, announced that it publicly stated that the agreement, its secret agreement with China, has been breached because they transferred a bishop without the Vatican's permission or knowledge, and that is the Communist Party. So, I mean, I think they've realized that. I hope they realize that there's been no good fruit born from this secret agreement. We still don't know the provisions, what it said, but we do know that it was for the appointment of Catholic bishops to have an arrangement with China, that there'd be participation on both sides in those appointments. And that has not happened. I mean, the Vatican, of course, is very eager to have bishops because that's the life of the Catholic Church. It stems from the episcopal duties, and a third of the diocese are without bishops in China and have been for years. And so, without bishops, it's going to come to a stop.
Wow. Well, as we kind of come to a conclusion here, I wanted to end by asking, what can everyday Americans at home do to stand up to China? I mean, how can we, there are so many companies that continue to do business in China, the CCP continues to profit on Americans buying products and things manufactured in China. How do we fight against this? What can everyday Americans do to step up to this challenge?
Well, I think if you're a praying person, you should definitely pray for those who are being persecuted. And then I think that you should also educate yourself about what is happening in China to all the different religions, and whether or not whether they're not they're religious, if they are suffering for human rights. I think of Martin Lee, who was the mogul in he was a wealthy businessman in Hong Kong, still is in Hong Kong. He's in prison, and he is facing a possible life sentence for supporting democracy. He ran an independent newspaper in Hong Kong called the Apple Daily, and because of that dissent, he may face life imprisonment. He could have left Hong Kong. He has houses around the world, but he chose to stay because he wanted to take a stand for freedom. And there is a letter campaign to write to him. But he's a perfect example. He's a lay Catholic, but he's not a church official. And he's one of many whose names we do know, who are in prison, facing life for many years in prison, who are being tortured every day. And we should be educating ourselves about this. And then we should be talking to our elected leaders and pressing them to do something to stop, to expose what China is really about in its governance. Do more on to focus more on China's human rights atrocities.
Absolutely. And well, thank you so much, Nina, for just sharing your insights on this and exposing what's going on there. And for those of you watching at home, we just thank you so much for joining us. And please stay tuned with us. Continue to check back on the website, hudson.org, for all of our upcoming events. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.